life. And what I want to say is, of course, I was born with zarzuela, and in particular, this one that we are going to do, it can be the story of my life, and as you will see later on, also the story of the life of our stage director, producer, Emilio Sacchi. The story of my life, it is because the composer from Luisa Fernanda, the Maestro Moreno Torroba, he wrote this wonderful, wonderful zarzuela in 1932, and gradually becomes one of the most popular zarzuelas, even though it has many numbers of great success. My parents, they have it in the repertoire. But this zarzuela, it makes the story of my life because my father and my mother both were great interpreters of this zarzuela, as you will find out later with Emilio Sacchi, his relation also with the zarzuela, really big. And Maestro Torroba, in 1946, he decided to make a tour, you know, with his company of zarzuela, going from Spain to Cuba, Puerto Rico, and Mexico. And the story starts there, and in 1946, 5 years old, with my sister and an aunt, we stayed in Spain, and my parents, they came to America, and they enjoyed this wonderful performing in the way that the zarzuela company has been always operating in those days. It was like they have a repertoire in the company of 40, 50 zarzuelas. They will rehearse after the performance, and the next day they have a new one. You know, it was just a miracle. I mean, this was the way that it was made in those days. So my parents, in those days, it was not as easy as today. You take a plane and you go back and forward. So they just went there, and they had to wait. They have a lot of work to do. And finally, the company was going back after almost 2 years from Mexico. They stopped in La Habana. And my parents, when they were in La Habana, before going back to Spain, they said, we love so much Mexico, let's go for 10 days. They went back to Mexico, and it turns to be that they were the rest of their lives in Mexico. They went back to Mexico. By then, my parents, they had been very popular. The company of Maestro Torroba went back to Spain, but they formed their own company, and my sister, my aunt, and me, we came to America. So we came to Mexico, and that's, as I said, the story of my life, because of course I grew in Mexico. I studied in Mexico. I started singing in Mexico. I married with Marta in Mexico. Have, you know, 2 of our children that are Mexicans, and I have been Spanish, yes, Mexican also. Spanish by birth and Mexican by adoption and by growing there and by having the family. The zarzuela world for me, it was really the way I formed my musical career. I have my parents with their own company, as I say, performing 2 zarzuelas daily, 3 on Sunday, and rehearsing every night after that zarzuela, because the next day there were 2 new ones. So you can imagine the amount of work that it was. And for me, it was doing any kind of jobs that you can imagine. My sister and me, we start saying 2 lines crossing the stage, then playing anything that has to play the children. Then I start, because I was growing up and I was a musician, I started to play the bells backstage. I started to conduct the chorus. Finally, we don't have a big orchestra. My parents, they were performing with a small orchestra. So I played the piano, I feel some of the harmonies, some of the instruments that we don't have. And then finally I conduct some of the zarzuelas to my parents, and then I start singing. So from then on I realized that somebody told me, Placido, we think that you have a voice to sing opera. And that's the change. That's the change. I start singing some zarzuelas. I start singing. The baritone is the most juicy part in the zarzuela. The tenor is gorgeous also. They have, but in most, the big percentage of the characters of the baritone that are more juicy to sing and better characters. So I used to sing, you know, following the steps of my father, the baritones, until I realized that I was a tenor. I started to sing. Well, that's a story. Later on, my friendship with Maestro Federico Moreno Torroba was a very big one. He even wrote an opera for me that I made the world premiere in Madrid. It was called El Poeta, based in the poet José de Espronceda. And that's the story. So now, before we will continue and we will talk more about Luisa Fernanda, I would like to introduce to you Emilio Sahi, which is our director and really involved also so much in Luisa Fernanda that let me start explain to you that his grandfather and grandmother, they were the ones that made the world premiere of Luisa Fernanda, singing as baritone and as soprano. And his uncle, Luisa Fernanda, was together with my father and his grandfather, some of the three great Vidal Hernandos that they were in the world of zarzuela. Of course, my mother as Luisa Fernanda, she sang the role I don't know how many times, and I did the tenor role of Javier Moreno, which you will hear it with a wonderful splendid tenors. And after, I cannot resist to do the part of my father. And I can say that was very difficult to follow, and I still believe, when I remember the way my father used to sing and say certain phrases, that nobody sang that like me. And I hear many across the years. Of course, I never hear your grandfather, Emilio, and I never hear Luis in life, but I knew the way that my father said, and that since I was little, I said, I hope I will sing the role once. My parents, they used to have not only zarzuela but operetta. It was half zarzuela and half operetta. And of course, the two most successful works, they were Luisa Fernanda and the Merry Widow. And so they always say, my parents, because they fight very much, they really formed their own company, and it was always very difficult. And they say the day that Luisa Fernanda dies and the Merry Widow marries, you know, so we can just go home, you know, because we don't have any more works. No, it's a lot of works, of course, but I mean, these two, they are tremendous. Bienvenido los fareadores, ya que alegres venís cantando, con vosotros yo quiero cantar.